Today we're taking a look at the book that launched one of my favorite X-Men spin-off titles, Excalibur, The Sword is Drawn. This book is such a beautiful comic book team effort that launches an equally beautiful, whimsical, poignant, and fun series. And I think this is an incredibly important and special comic too. And if you're someone who says, well, isn't this a random UK-based team? That doesn't sound very interesting. Then I would advise you to think a little bit more about that, think further, and at least hear me out. After all, the success of the new X-Men team we saw first appear in Giant Size X-Men #1 can largely be attributed to the fact that many of the characters, while somewhat fitting into traditional stereotypes or character story roles, were created to appeal to an international market and therefore had a very culturally diverse composition rather than just being a team of Americans. So, some important context before we actually dive into the story of Excalibur, The Sword is Drawn here. This story takes place after Fall of the Mutants when the X-Men are presumed dead. Kitty Pryde and Nightcrawler are currently recovering from injuries on Muir Island. Captain Britain and his girlfriend Meggan, who you may not know of but we will certainly talk more about her, are living together based out of a lighthouse in London. And Rachel Summers, she ends up in London too, but how she got there is a little more complicated and we'll talk about that as well. So those characters are our key players who eventually all come together and form the team of Excalibur. And yes, they all have an invested interest in mutant rights and just the general longevity and survival of mutants, but that's not the real connective tissue of this team. What that really is, well, trauma and grief is what brings them together. Nightcrawler and Kitty Pryde are mourning the presumed deaths of the X-Men and are of course incredibly heartbroken and distraught, and they start the story off in a place where it seems like their world has been completely shattered, and that's because around this time it kind of has been. To have finally found a family that accepts you and enables you to be the best versions of yourself, and then to lose them so tragically is a horrifically shocking event. Captain Britain and Meggan are also mourning because, for those who don't know, Psylocke, Betsy Braddock, is the twin sister of Captain Britain, and she had a friendly relationship with Meggan too. And there's kind of this interesting contrast as we initially bounce between Kitty Pryde and Nightcrawler and Captain Britain and Meggan. Kitty and Nightcrawler sort of lean on each other in the aftermath of their tragic losses. They look out for each other, and super importantly, they listen to each other as they talk about their regrets and their pain. But the dynamic of Captain Britain and Meggan's relationship is one where she's very unsure of herself and her place in the world, while also being very dependent on him, and he can in turn be very withdrawn. Dealing with the presumed death of his sister, he turns to the bottle, and when Meggan reaches out to him to deal with this loss together, he pushes her away, and this kind of builds the framework for what I would say is a toxic relationship between the two that is depicted in the run of Excalibur. And then Rachel Summers has an interesting insertion here because yes, she is also coming back, and she grieves for the presumed dead X-Men alongside Kitty and Nightcrawler just as they would. And you know, her whole purpose anyway is to stop a future where mutants lose and they die and they end up in concentration camps and she ends up being a slave that has to hunt her fellow mutants down. This is the stuff she's lived through already and is back in time hoping to stop. That's pretty much kind of a quick summary of Rachel Summers, but in this we meet her sort of through this multiversal connection, and she gets spit out in London. Way back when, originally, Chris Claremont, I think, had planned a Phoenix limited series focused along Rachel Summers' adventures in the multiverse, so that would have been like a prequel to this, but instead we just know that, you know, there was some bad and crazy stuff that happened on this multiversal adventure that she went on, but that is forever lost to time, so we don't have too much context on it. Also important to note for our story, there are a few people hunting after Rachel that sort of incite all of this. The first being the Werewolves, because Rachel's coming right out of being a slave in Mojo World and they're sort of trying to bring her back. Saturnine is also hunting her down because Rachel is currently in possession of the Phoenix Force, and Saturnine is like, nope, sorry honey, that's a threat to existence and you gotta go. I mean, she doesn't say it like that, but essentially that's what she's saying. And if you're unfamiliar with who Saturnine is, because I was when I first read this, she is the Omniversal Magistrix, and she sends the TechNet, these kind of alien bounty hunters, to hunt down Rachel Summers. The story starts off by giving us a taste of where each character is in their grieving stages. It opens with Kitty Pryde, who I mentioned is very injured and her natural state is non-tangible tangible at this time, and she has to actually focus pretty hard to remain tangible and not phase through things. But we actually open as she's having a nightmare, and the nightmare is kind of a terrifying place for this story to start because I promise, Excalibur, it is not overwhelmingly sad and tragic. It's actually fairly whimsical, fun, and even a lot promiscuous at times. But I think this is mostly a manifestation of Kitty's grief, and the nightmare itself is basically all the X-Men on a movie set in Hollywood, and they're not actually themselves, instead they're like actors playing roles on a Hollywood set. And I think this might demonstrate that Kitty feels some guilt, maybe a sense that she didn't play her role correctly or well enough during the fall of the mutants, and because of that, everyone else suffered. And as she tries to talk to these characters who aren't actually the characters that we know, she's excited that her family isn't dead, they're alive, and when she does, they aren't the characters that she knew, and they just reject her, and it's sad, and there's some scary stuff in there too, particularly with Psylocke's eyes getting replaced right in front of Kitty. And then Rachel Summers shows up here, and I think the lines are a bit blurred on if this is like her emanating a psychic message into Kitty's dream, or more so what I believe is that they were trying to introduce this concept to the story that the dream plane is another spot in the multiverse, and as Rachel is tumbling through it, she connects with Kitty here for a moment and helps her out of this nightmare. I support that, one, because Nightcrawler tells Kitty he had the same dream pretty much later, and two, Rachel Summers says, dreams are sometimes windows to other realities, and waking doesn't always make things better. And then three, the werewolves that are chasing down Rachel from Mojo World then show up here in Kitty's dream too. So I'm going to go with that interpretation. It may be incorrect, but that's at least how I support it. And then I did kind of cover them already, but a bit more detail about Meggan and Captain Britain's introduction in this book. Meggan is one of my favorite characters in this series. She's super complex and I could talk about her for days. She is an empathic shapeshifter, and we first see her in a natural environment, feeling very free as she is morphed into a dolphin and is swimming with a pod of dolphins, which sounds crazy and wild, but it's fun and it looks cool. But when she returns to the lighthouse they live in, she sees this broadcast on the television that is the death of Psylocke. And there's all these photos and whatnot of Psylocke and Brian sprawled across the floor, and Meggan is crying as she watches. I want to note here too, looking back, it's interesting she learns this information from the television because she's a really kind of sheltered, repressed character throughout a lot of the Excalibur run and has this fascination with television, and it's to the point where she's exposed to a lot of things in life through it, and it is this foundation also for how she romanticizes some things. So I think them delivering tragic news through the television as well is perhaps a point about how she can have a tendency to experience emotion through the conduit of a tube screen. Obviously though, as she goes through her morning, she realizes how awful this is for Captain Britain, and she goes to check on him. This is the launching point for his alcoholism that is also a prevalent occurrence during the run of Excalibur, and like I said before, it also is the beginning of our window into a toxic relationship. I may have a ton of bias because Meggan really resonates with me, but I cannot absolve Captain Britain here. He nearly hits Meggan and is generally abusive in an array of ways throughout the series. He's certainly a complicated man, and he is grieving, and this is a true-to-life character. There are plenty of people like him in the world, but I don't think Claremont intended him to be redeemable in this relationship, and he's not really. But I'd be curious to hear what you all think about that one. Then we catch up with Nightcrawler, who his injuries left his teleportation abilities very dampened, and doing so makes him very weak. But he's trying to push himself hard, almost punishing himself to get back into the swing of things as we meet him in Moira's version of the Danger Room basically. And he almost hurts himself even more getting overwhelmed in there, but Kitty comes just in time and helps him out. We then get a bit of insight into Kurt's emotional state here and the guilt that he too feels for having survived, and then Kitty and Nightcrawler end up getting caught in the middle of the Saturnine and her bounty hunters thing as they're hunting for Rachel, and Meggan comes to Muir Island at this time as well to get some advice about Captain Britain, and basically they get outnumbered, Kitty and Meggan are kidnapped, Nightcrawler teleports away and makes his way to Captain Britain in London for help. And I want to chat about that Nightcrawler and Captain Britain moment just for a bit because it is kind of an amazing moment. So when Nightcrawler goes to him for help, Captain Britain is really drunk and passed out. So what Nightcrawler does, kind of hilariously, is he literally tosses Captain Britain in the ocean. And, you know, at first I thought that was a little weird that Nightcrawler was doing that and what he says at first too. But I think he's getting really worried that, like, the two remaining members of his found family, Kitty Pryde and Rachel Summers, are now in imminent danger. But he says, "What you need, Air Captain, is a bath. And if perchance you should fail to resurface, well, based on what I've seen, no great loss." And look, I'm sorry I can't do a German accent, but I also can't say a Kurt Wagner line, without trying to do the German accent. Captain Britain does end up flying out of the water, and then we get this really nice sort of battle of the characters' perspectives. Whereas Nightcrawler has something to prove and wants to help his family, Captain Britain is in doom mode and is kind of at his lowest with this point of view of what's the point of saving them now when all roads of being a hero lead to death anyway. And I love the scene, and it ends in this, it ends with another great Nightcrawler line, but I won't attempt an accent again, don't worry, I will just show it on the screen right now. So I think that should piece together for you how all of the team comes together, and that's when the battles and the action ensues, and they end up saving Meggan and Kitty, and they end up getting the bounty hunters and the werewolves off Rachel's back, for now, together as a team. And this leads us to this beautiful campfire scene where they share fond memories of their presumed dead friends, bond over those, decide that they're strong and they're not going to drown in their grief, and they're stronger together, and together they can maybe, just maybe, help realize a harmonious world where people live in peace. And Rachel Summers proposes they form the team of Excalibur so as to not give up on the dream of the X-Men. And it's a wonderful takeaway that I found really endearing. Be true to the principles your lost loved ones have instilled with you, and use that to make the world a better place. And for these characters, to use that to make the world where a tragedy like the one that fell upon their loved ones could never happen again. That's the dream, at least. Thank you guys for watching. I really enjoyed making this video. If you are a fan of the channel, you know I love Excalibur, so I appreciate you listening to me this long talk about it. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and have a great rest of your day.